July 22nd, 2023, Jacksonville, Florida. She'd crossed 10,000 miles chasing a voice from a screen. Margaret Ellis, 59, stepped off the plane with a suitcase full of hope and a heart set on a man she had never met. For weeks she'd planned this moment, selling her husband's properties, draining their savings, and vanishing from the only life she'd ever known. But as the airport doors slid open and that humid Florida air met her face, something shifted. The man who promised her forever wasn't there. Her phone buzzed once. A message appeared. Change of plans. From that moment on, nothing about Margaret's journey would go the way she imagined. Was leaving her husband, her country, and everything she built ever worth it? Fremantle, Western Australia, April 5, 1964. The Hollis family lived in a small sandstone house that faced the Indian Ocean. It wasn't grand, but it was steady, the kind of home where clocks ticked on schedule and dinner was served at 6 sharp. Graham Hollis, a postal clerk, woke before dawn each morning to iron his uniform and prepare his bicycle for the delivery route. His wife, Lydia, sat by the kitchen window mending clothes for neighbors, her sewing machine humming like a metronome. Their daughter, Margaret, was their only child. Quiet, observant, a little girl who found comfort in the rhythm of repetition. She loved the sound of her father's keys jingling when he returned home, and the smell of starch from her mother's neatly pressed laundry. Life inside that house ran on precision, where mistakes were corrected gently but never forgotten. Her father taught her arithmetic before she turned 6, setting coins in perfect rows across the table. "See, Maggie," he'd say, "numbers tell the truth when people don't." Her mother taught her neatness. Buttons in order, seams straight, hair brushed smooth. They weren't unkind. They simply believed love showed itself in care, not in words. When other children played hopscotch in the street, Margaret sat by the window, writing lists of things to do, names to remember, chores to finish. Her mother would glance over and smile softly. "That's my tidy girl." In school, Margaret's teachers adored her. She wasn't loud, but she was dependable, the kind who never turned in homework late, who arranged her pencils by color. Friends came and went, but Margaret's attention rarely drifted from her books. She excelled in mathematics, finished first in every class, and won a small scholarship to Curtin University to study accounting. Her father's pride was quiet but genuine. "You'll never need to depend on anyone," he told her. That lesson, more than any other, shaped the woman she would become. By 26, Margaret had built a calm, careful life. She worked as a junior accountant in Perth, saved every paycheck, and kept her apartment spotless. She didn't drink, didn't go out often, didn't take risks. She lived exactly as she had been raised, within the lines. That's where she met Richard Ellis, a 28-year-old electrician with kind eyes and a patient voice. He came to fix a faulty power socket in her office one afternoon. He wasn't particularly charming, but his steadiness caught her attention. When he asked if she wanted to grab coffee, she agreed, surprising herself. Their first date was unremarkable on paper, but unforgettable to her. They met at a small cafe overlooking the Fremantle harbor. He wore a light denim shirt and smelled faintly of sawdust. She talked about numbers. He talked about wiring and building houses. There were no grand gestures, no fireworks, but there was something comfortable in the simplicity. "You're easy to talk to," Richard said, stirring his coffee. Margaret smiled. "Maybe because I don't talk much." They both laughed quietly, and that was enough. Their courtship lasted 2 years, slow, deliberate, and steady. Richard would stop by her office after work with meat pies from the bakery. She'd leave little notes in his lunchbox, reminding him to eat or to call his mother. They spent Sundays by the coast, sharing fish and chips and watching the water. Margaret found in him what she thought she needed, safety. Richard found in her what he lacked, order. When he proposed in 1991, he didn't get down on one knee. He simply handed her a small velvet box during dinner and said, "You make everything easier. Will you marry me?" She said yes without hesitation. Their wedding was modest. Family, close friends, and a local pastor who spoke briefly about commitment and patience. Margaret wore an ivory dress her mother had sewn by hand, and Richard wore a pressed shirt his father had ironed for him that morning. There was laughter, real laughter, and even a moment where Richard lifted her in his arms as they left the church. For the first few years, life felt perfect. They bought a small brick home in Perth's southern suburbs, with a lemon tree in the backyard, and neighbors who waved as they passed. Margaret decorated every corner, lace curtains, polished floors, fresh flowers every week. They had dinner together every night, sometimes by candlelight, sometimes with the TV humming in the background. On weekends, they took drives along the coast, stopping for ice cream and long walks where he'd rest his arm around her shoulders. They didn't have children, but they had plans. A bigger house one day, maybe a trip to Sydney, maybe saving enough to retire early. Margaret kept photo albums of their early years, picnics, birthdays, anniversaries. In those pictures, her eyes are soft, her smile genuine. Richard often told his friends, "She keeps me grounded. She's the reason the bills get paid and the lights stay on." He meant it. He'd leave little notes on the fridge. "You're my home, Em." And she'd write back, "Always." For a while, everything worked exactly as she'd hoped. Their lives were predictable, their happiness quiet but real. Margaret found comfort in routine. Sunday morning pancakes, weekday lunches packed neatly, Thursday evenings spent balancing the accounts while Richard watched sports. They celebrated small things, a raise at work, a repaired car, a new piece of furniture. Their joy wasn't loud, but it was steady. Even their disagreements were mild. Richard once bought a motorbike without telling her. She frowned, worried about the cost. He apologized, promising to sell it if she wanted. She shook her head. "Keep it. Just promise you'll be careful." He smiled, kissed her forehead, and said, "You worry too much, Maggie." Moments like that made her believe they were unbreakable. But time has a way of dulling even the brightest routines. Years passed, and the laughter in their house grew quieter. The photos stopped being taken. The lemon tree in the backyard still bloomed, but neither of them noticed. Margaret didn't realize the distance forming between them because it grew silently, like dust on polished shelves. By the time she turned 50, their once perfect home felt more like a waiting room, tidy, still, emotionally vacant. Richard wasn't unkind. He was simply occupied with work, bills, repairs. They still shared dinner, but spoke little. When he asked, "You okay?" she always answered, "Yes." It was easier than explaining the ache that had no cause. The early years had been full of laughter and shared plans, but now only silence filled the space where dreams used to live. Margaret didn't resent him. She simply felt unseen. She filled the void with work, lists, and order, the same habits that had kept her safe since childhood. But soon, that safety would become suffocating. And one evening, as rain tapped against the window of their perfectly kept home, her loneliness began to whisper a dangerous idea, that maybe the love she'd been missing still existed somewhere, waiting for her, even if it wasn't with Richard. Before we continue, make sure you're subscribed and share this story. Because the life Margaret thought she controlled was about to be rewritten by a single message from a man who wasn't who he claimed to be. By 2018, the Ellis home had grown painfully quiet. What once felt like peace now pressed down like heavy air, an unspoken emptiness that followed Margaret Ellis from morning to night. Her mother's passing that year had been the final thread holding her emotionally steady. The funeral was modest, attended mostly by neighbors and a few of Richard's relatives. Margaret stood beside the casket, her expression composed, her eyes dry. When Richard reached for her hand, she didn't pull away, but she didn't hold on either. Later, as guests offered condolences, she simply said, "She lived a full life," then turned back toward the flowers. That night, when Richard asked if she was all right, she replied, "Of course," before turning to face the wall. For the next several days, she kept busy cleaning, organizing, and returning her mother's few belongings to boxes, one labeled keep, the other donated. It was the same routine that had kept her safe since childhood. When she couldn't fix her feelings, she fixed her surroundings. But no amount of order could mute the hollow quiet that lingered in every corner of their house. Dinner conversations faded into the clinking of silverware. Richard would come home exhausted, wash his hands at the sink, and settle into his recliner, the television filling the silence with background noise. Margaret would sit at the table, pretending to read the newspaper, though her eyes never moved past the first paragraph. The routine was predictable, but each day stretched longer, colder. There was no fight, no anger, just an absence so thick it made the walls feel smaller. At work, Margaret's colleagues noticed changes. She began arriving earlier, staying later, and volunteering to handle extra files long after closing time. "You're the most dedicated accountant in Perth," her co-worker, Helen Cross, joked one evening as they packed up. Margaret smiled faintly. "I just like to keep busy." But Helen noticed the fatigue in her face, the faint dark circles, the distant stare. She invited Margaret out for dinner several times, but Margaret always declined. "Maybe next week," she'd say, though next week never came. Work had become her refuge, a place where logic replaced loneliness. Every number balanced, every formula made sense. Richard didn't understand how deeply the quiet had started to hurt her. He was a good man by conventional standards, responsible, faithful, hard-working. In his mind, loyalty was love. Providing, maintaining, being present, that was enough. But Margaret needed more. She needed warmth, words, presence that felt alive. She didn't want him to fix her. She wanted him to see her. But years of habit had built walls between them that neither knew how to tear down. One evening in August, she prepared dinner as usual: baked salmon, steamed vegetables, 2 glasses of water. They sat across from each other under the hum of the ceiling light. The only sound was the scraping of cutlery. After a long silence, Richard cleared his throat. "Long day?" he asked without looking up. "They all are," she answered softly. He nodded, chewing slowly, and the silence returned. It was always that way, short exchanges followed by minutes of nothing. When she tried to speak, the words felt pointless. When she stayed quiet, it felt safer. In her journal that month, investigators later found an entry written in her neat, restrained handwriting. "Sometimes I feel invisible in my own house. I make noise just to remind myself I'm still here." That line captured her entire existence. A woman surrounded by comfort, yet untouched by connection. The loneliness grew worse at night. Margaret often stayed awake long after Richard had gone to bed, sitting by the window with a cup of tea, watching porch lights blink on and off across the neighborhood. She began scrolling through her phone, checking the weather, reading articles, anything to fill the silence. It wasn't that she was unhappy with Richard specifically. She was unhappy with being unseen. There's a difference between solitude and being forgotten, and she had crossed that line years ago. Her friends at church noticed she'd stopped attending Sunday services. The choir director, Mrs. Peterson, called once to check on her. "We missed your voice today, Margaret." "I'm fine," she replied. "Just tired." The truth was, she couldn't bear the small talk, the cheerful faces. It all felt foreign now, like she'd stepped out of rhythm with the rest of the world. Even God, in her mind, had gone quiet. Richard, meanwhile, carried on as always. He woke early, fixed what broke around the house, and left notes reminding her about bills and groceries. He wasn't cruel or careless, just conditioned. When asked by a friend how things were at home, he answered, "Good as ever. Maggie keeps me fed. I keep the lights on." To him, that was marriage, a practical exchange of stability. He didn't realize that what she wanted wasn't another working light or fixed faucet. It was the feeling of being chosen again. In November 2018, Margaret hosted her first Christmas alone in years. Richard's job required overtime, and he insisted he couldn't take off. She decorated the house by herself, setting the table for 2, though she already knew he wouldn't make it home until midnight. The house glowed softly with white string lights, but the air inside was still. She poured herself a glass of red wine, opened her mother's old recipe book, and stared at the instructions for plum pudding. After a few minutes, she closed it and whispered, "Maybe next year." Those were the nights when silence felt like punishment. She started keeping the television on just to hear voices in the background. Sometimes she'd watch programs she didn't even like, just to feel less alone. Helen, her co-worker, noticed she'd started calling the office from home after hours, pretending to ask work questions that didn't really matter. When Helen teased her about being a perfectionist, Margaret laughed lightly but said nothing. Loneliness isn't sudden. It grows slowly, like ivy climbing a wall, until it covers everything. And in Margaret's home, it had covered every inch. She tried to fill it with structure, with schedules, with chores. But the silence was constant. And when something becomes constant, it becomes dangerous. That's the thing about quiet. It starts to whisper. It asks questions. It tempts you to listen to anything that sounds like life again. By early 2019, Margaret's coping habits had turned into rituals. She'd wake at 5, make tea, leave Richard's lunch neatly packed on the counter, and drive to work before the sun rose. In the evenings, she'd sit at the kitchen table balancing numbers until her eyes blurred. Sometimes she'd look up from her laptop and glance at Richard's reflection on the TV screen. His eyes fixed on sports, expression blank. She wanted to speak, to say something, anything. But fear of disrupting their peace held her back. Silence had become their language. The truth is, Margaret had learned to hide loneliness behind composure. She was raised that way. Never make a mess, never show what hurts. But as her nights grew longer, her phone became her closest companion. She began reading blogs about aging, loss, and late-life reinvention. She scrolled through pages where people shared their stories of second chances, widows, divorcees, people who'd found love again through messages. It was innocent at first, just reading, curious. But curiosity and craving aren't far apart. The quiet in her home no longer felt peaceful. It felt alive, breathing, waiting. And one night, as she sat in her chair staring at the faint blue glow of her laptop, that waiting ended. A small notification appeared at the corner of her screen, a message request from someone she didn't know. The name read, David Stone. His profile picture showed kind eyes, graying hair, and a caption beneath it that read, Widowed, faith and family first. When silence becomes unbearable, even the most cautious hearts start listening for echoes online. Before you go, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from right now? And if you've stayed with me to this point, type, I'm still here, so we know who's truly following this story. Because from this moment on, Margaret's life is about to change in ways no one could have imagined. August 4th, 2022, Perth, Western Australia. It was a cold Thursday night, and the sound of rain tapped softly against the kitchen window. The hum of the refrigerator was the only noise in the house. Margaret Ellis, now 58, sat alone at the dining table with her laptop open, a half-drunk cup of tea cooling beside her. She wasn't searching for anything that night, just scrolling through her feed out of habit. The blue glow of the screen was the only light in the room, reflecting off her glasses as she clicked through familiar posts. Neighborhood updates, cooking tutorials, a few quotes about faith. Then, at 9:47 p.m., a small red notification popped up at the corner of her screen. You have a new message request. It was from someone named David Stone. His profile photo showed a man in his 50s with kind eyes and a salt and pepper beard, dressed casually in a white shirt with the caption, Engineer, widowed, Florida, USA. Margaret hesitated. She rarely got messages from strangers, let alone men from another continent. But curiosity tugged at her. She clicked. The message was simple. You seem kind. I lost my wife 3 years ago. Maybe God lets broken people find each other. She read it twice, unsure how to feel. It wasn't romantic, at least not in tone. It sounded gentle, safe. The kind of message that didn't ask for anything but understanding. For the first time in years, someone had noticed her. That night, she typed a short response. I'm sorry for your loss. You're right. Maybe God does bring people together for a reason. She hit send, closed the laptop, and went to bed. But sleep didn't come easily. Her mind replayed those words. Maybe God lets broken people find each other. By morning, another message waited. Good morning, Margaret. It's still night here in Florida, but I just wanted to wish you a peaceful day. You deserve it. She smiled before realizing she hadn't told him her name. He'd probably seen it on her profile. Still, the message warmed her. It wasn't grand, but it felt personal. And so, she replied, Good night to you then, David. Thank you for your kindness. That exchange marked the start of something Margaret didn't recognize yet, a slow, calculated weaving of trust that would soon consume her world. Over the next few days, messages became conversations. Conversations became rituals. Every morning before work, she'd check her phone for his daily blessing, as he called it. Good morning, my dear Margaret. Remember, the world needs your light. And every night, she'd write back before bed. Thank you, David. I hope tomorrow brings you peace too. It was small talk, yes, but it was constant, predictable, safe. That's how it began, not with grand declarations, but with quiet consistency. He asked about her late parents, about her faith, about how long she'd been married. She told him she'd been with Richard for over 30 years, but that things had gone quiet. He responded immediately. Silence can be worse than anger. My wife and I used to say, love isn't loud. It's presence. I miss that. That single sentence hooked her heart. By September, they were messaging constantly. Margaret began bringing her phone to work meetings, checking it between spreadsheets. Her colleague, Helen Cross, once noticed her smiling at her phone and teased, Someone special texting you? Margaret laughed it off, saying, Just an old friend from online. But her tone gave her away. There was color in her cheeks again, something soft returning to her face after years of stillness. Helen didn't press, but she later said, It was like she'd come back to life. I didn't know what it was, but she looked happy. At night, the conversations deepened. David wrote long messages filled with emotional storytelling about losing his wife to cancer, raising his son alone, and learning to live again. He described his faith in God and how he believed souls meet twice, once in life and once in eternity. You remind me that there are still good hearts left in this world, he wrote. I don't know why, but you feel familiar. Margaret couldn't explain why his words touched her the way they did. Maybe it was because no one had spoken to her like that in years. Their chats turned into video calls, or so she thought. The calls were blurry, with his camera acting up, as he claimed. He'd say, Sorry, Margaret, the signal here's terrible. I can hear you, though, and that's what matters. He wanted her to feel a connection, not verify it. By October 2022, her world had begun to shift around this new relationship. She told herself it wasn't an affair. There was no physical betrayal, no intention to hurt Richard. But she began to keep secrets. She hid her phone under her pillow at night. She changed her passwords. When Richard asked what she was always typing, she replied, Just reading the news. That was partly true. David had become her news, her morning update, her night recap. One message read, I thank God for crossing our paths. It's strange how we can care for someone we've never met, isn't it? She responded. It's strange, yes, but I believe everything happens for a reason. To which he replied, Then maybe we're the reason. It was subtle, careful, and patient. And for a woman like Margaret, methodical, disciplined, starved for warmth, it felt miraculous. She didn't see it as a danger. She saw it as deliverance. When Margaret mentioned feeling distant from Richard, he replied, Maybe God's trying to remind you that love still exists, even if it finds you in unexpected ways. By late November, their conversations had become intimate, not in a physical sense, but emotional. He asked her what she dreamed of, what she feared most. She confessed, I'm afraid I've lived my whole life unseen. He wrote back, You're seen now, Margaret. You're not invisible to me. That single line broke something open in her. After that, she never went a day without speaking to him. Meanwhile, Richard remained unaware. He assumed her late nights at the computer were work-related. Once he asked, "You're always on that laptop lately. Is everything all right?" She smiled softly and said, "It's nothing. Just keeping busy." He nodded, returning to his chair, never suspecting that his wife, the same woman who once measured life in decimals and deadlines, was slowly being measured by someone else's affection. David didn't rush. He praised her, built her confidence, then subtly made her question her existing relationships. "Do you ever feel like you gave too much of yourself to people who never saw you?" he wrote one night. Margaret paused before answering. "Sometimes, yes," he replied. "You deserve more, Margaret. You've given enough. Let someone care for you now." That statement, that invitation, changed everything. From then on, Margaret wasn't just responding to messages. She was responding to an idea that someone across the world saw her as special. As December approached, David began describing his life in Florida. Long days at construction sites, quiet evenings by the ocean. He told her he prayed for her every morning. He even sent photos, himself at a job site, blueprints on a table, a sunset view from his supposed home. To Margaret, they were proof of a man who cared. And then came the first phone call, audio only. His voice was calm, deep, and affectionate. "Margaret," he said softly, "you sound exactly as I imagined." She blushed, replying, "I was worried I'd sound silly." He chuckled. "You sound like home." She laughed nervously, but that one phrase echoed through her. "You sound like home." By the end of 2022, Margaret's entire emotional life revolved around that voice, those messages. She prayed for him, defended him in her thoughts, and began withdrawing even further from everyone else. Her coworkers noticed she stopped joining lunch breaks. Richard, meanwhile, sensed her distance but couldn't name it. "Before we continue, tell me, have you ever met someone online who seemed too good to be true? Would you know if it was real or a setup? Drop your thoughts and location in the comments below. And if you're still here with us, type 'I'm still here.' Because the next message she received would take her deeper into a connection that would change everything. February 2023, Perth, Australia. The summer air was warm and quiet, the kind of quiet that used to soothe Margaret Ellis, but now it only reminded her of waiting. She sat by her bedroom window, phone in hand, the glow of the screen reflecting on her face. Another message had just come through from David Stone, the man who now filled every space her husband no longer could. His words appeared like verses meant for her alone. "You are my answered prayer, Margaret. Proverbs says a kind heart is worth more than rubies. God sent you to me." She read it over and over, her lips curving into a smile that even she didn't recognize anymore. For months now, their conversations had shifted from small talk to something that felt almost sacred. He no longer just comforted her. He worshipped her, in words that carried the rhythm of faith. David had learned the language of her heart. Every quote, every verse he sent came from the parts of Scripture she loved most, the ones she often shared years earlier on Facebook. "I still can't believe you remember my favorite verse," she typed one night. He replied within seconds, "How could I forget? You carry the same light my wife once had. I know God doesn't replace love. He renews it." His tone was gentle, reverent, and spiritual. To Margaret, he wasn't just a man anymore. He was divine reassurance that love could return after a lifetime of absence. It was around this time that people around her began to notice changes. She stopped attending Sunday service, something she'd done for decades. The church choir director, Mrs. Peterson, mentioned her absence to a friend, saying, "Margaret's been quiet lately. I called last week, but she said she's been praying at home instead." In truth, her prayers had moved online. Every morning, she and David prayed together through messages. He'd send a verse, and she'd respond with gratitude. "Amen," she'd write. "You're my miracle, David." He told her that her strength inspired him. "You've shown me how faith feels again," he wrote one morning. She replied, You've given me something to believe in again." They began exchanging photos. Not romantic ones, just small glimpses of their daily lives. She'd send him a picture of the sunset outside her window. He'd reply with a sunrise over the Florida coast. The time difference became part of their connection. When her world grew dark, his was full of light. But while Margaret believed she was finding faith in love, David was studying her. Every word, every old post, every reaction. He learned how she spoke, what she missed, what she valued. He mirrored her beliefs perfectly. Faith, loyalty, gentleness. When she said she liked people who were humble, he said humility was his greatest strength. When she spoke about loss, he spoke about healing. She didn't realize he was shaping himself into the man she was waiting for. By March, her world had shrunk to a single conversation. She rarely saw her friends, skipped family calls, and spent every evening waiting for his messages. Helen Cross, her colleague, grew worried. "Mags," she said one day, "you've been distracted lately. You okay?" Margaret smiled, closing her laptop quickly. "I'm fine, Helen, just tired." Helen nodded but noticed something. Margaret had started wearing makeup again, the faintest pink lipstick she hadn't used in years. She looked alive, Helen later recalled, but in a way that made me uneasy. The more Margaret gave, the more David asked for. It began small, almost sweet. He told her his birthday was coming up in April. "You don't have to," he said, "but it would mean a lot if you sent me something that reminds you of me." She didn't think twice. She bought him a wristwatch online and shipped it to an address he provided in Miami. When the confirmation arrived, she felt proud, even giddy. She had done something thoughtful for someone who, she believed, had brought meaning back into her life. A week later, he sent a voice note. His tone was heavy, slower than usual. "Margaret, I didn't want to tell you this, but my company froze my account because of a tax issue. It's embarrassing, and I'm ashamed to ask, but could you help me with a short-term transfer? I'll pay you back in days, I promise." She read it 3 times. For someone else it might have raised alarms, but Margaret had spent months hearing his voice, his prayers, his affection. Trust had become instinct. She transferred $3,000 that same day. After she sent it, he thanked her as if she'd saved his life. "You've proven that love still exists. You're my angel," he wrote. She replied, "It's just money, David. Don't worry about it." But his gratitude didn't fade. It deepened, intensified. Each thank you became another emotional tether. He began calling her my blessing, my grace, my answered prayer. She started believing she was chosen for something divine. In April, he sent another message. "You're too good for this world. I've prayed for someone like you for years. I think God meant for our paths to cross so we could heal each other." She responded, "You've already healed me." What she didn't see was the quiet manipulation behind every line. His kindness wasn't spontaneous, it was crafted. He knew exactly how to feed her soul and keep her devoted. As months passed, their conversations blurred into dependency. Margaret couldn't go a day without hearing from him. When she didn't get a message for a few hours, she'd panic, checking her phone constantly. When he finally replied, she'd breathe again. "Sorry, sweetheart, long day on site," he'd write. "You were on my mind the whole time." He made her feel seen, even in absence. One evening, Richard came home to find her humming softly while cooking, a sound he hadn't heard in years. "You're in a good mood," he said casually. "It's just been a nice day," she answered, hiding the small smile on her lips. After dinner, she returned to her phone, typing quietly under the table while Richard watched the news. He didn't ask who she was texting. Maybe he didn't want to know. By May, Margaret's isolation was complete. She stopped answering Helen's calls, stopped visiting church, stopped attending work functions. The only world that mattered now existed through a glowing screen. When she told David she felt guilty for lying to Richard, he responded, "Sometimes love comes in unexpected ways, and not everyone will understand. God knows your heart, Margaret." Those words, "God knows your heart," became her permission to continue. One night, she sent him a photo of herself watching the sunset from her porch, the golden light on her face. "This is my piece," she wrote. He replied immediately, "And you are mine." That exchange would be the last innocent moment between them before everything shifted. By early June, his tone grew slightly more desperate. He told her a business deal had gone wrong, that an overseas contract was on hold because of legal fees. He said he didn't trust anyone else but her. "It's only temporary," he promised. "I'll return it as soon as I can." The number was higher this time, $18,000. Margaret hesitated for the first time, but after a long silence, he sent one more message. "If this is too much, I understand. I just thought we were partners now." That word, partners, tipped the scale. Within an hour, she transferred the money. From that point, David's hold over her wasn't emotional anymore. It was complete. Every message, every voice note, every declaration of faith pulled her deeper into a web she didn't realize she was building herself. He ended one late-night conversation with, "I've never met a woman like you, Margaret. You're proof that miracles exist." She replied softly, "Maybe we're both miracles." And as she sat in the dim light of her bedroom that night, her phone resting against her chest, she whispered to herself, "This must be what love feels like." She didn't know that love was about to cost her everything. If you've made it this far, don't just watch. Protect someone you love. Like this video, share it with anyone who might be too trusting online. Because stories like this don't begin with danger. They begin with faith in a stranger. June 10th, 2023, Perth, Western Australia. The house that had once been Margaret Ellis's pride now carried a quiet tension that pressed through every room. The air was heavy that morning when Richard Ellis opened the home computer to check their joint savings account, something he hadn't done in months. What he saw made his stomach twist. Their balance, once a comfortable sum, was missing nearly $40,000. At first, he thought it was a banking error. He refreshed the page, then scrolled through the withdrawals again. Each transfer was labeled as personal investment, the amounts wired overseas. When he turned to look at Margaret, who was sitting at the table sipping her tea, his voice was low but sharp. "Maggie, what's going on with our account?" She froze, her spoon mid-air. "What do you mean?" He spun the laptop toward her. "I mean this," he said. "There's money missing. A lot of money." Margaret's heart skipped. She had been careful, or at least she thought she had. "It's just a short-term thing," she said, trying to sound casual. "A friend needed help." Richard's face tightened. "A friend? Maggie, that's our life savings." She set her cup down, her hands trembling. "It's my money too, Richard." His voice rose, breaking years of practiced calm. "It's our money, Margaret. You don't just give away $40,000 to somebody online." That word, online, sliced through her chest. "You don't understand," she snapped back, louder than she intended. "You haven't looked at me in years. You don't even ask what I feel anymore." He stared at her, stunned. "So you replace me with some stranger on a computer?" She swallowed hard. "It's not like that. He's real. He's good. He listens." Her voice cracked at the end. The silence that followed was unlike any they had known. No longer peaceful, but broken. Richard pushed the chair back roughly. "You're being used, Margaret." "No," she said quickly, almost pleading. "He loves me." "He says he loves you because he wants your money," he shouted, and the sound startled both of them. They hadn't argued in years. It was always quiet between them, the kind of quiet that keeps things polite but hollow. Now, that politeness was gone, replaced by something raw and unfamiliar. Margaret's eyes glistened. "It's our life, Richard," she said softly. "And what life is this?" He stared at her, unable to respond. After a moment, he walked away, muttering, "You need help." When the bedroom door closed, Margaret sat in silence, her heart pounding. Every word he said echoed in her mind, But David's words came louder. Don't let anyone make you doubt what's real. People fear what they don't understand. That night she didn't sleep. She sat in front of her laptop with her headphones on, scrolling through old messages from David. She read them like scripture. You're my miracle. You have a kind of love that heals. Trust me, Margaret, and we'll build something no one can take away. Each line soothed the sting of Richard's words. Before bed, she typed, I think I made a mistake telling him. He doesn't understand. His reply came within minutes. Of course he doesn't. People trapped in the past never understand what new love feels like. Don't let him poison your heart. Stay strong for us. The next day, she erased the messages from her inbox, deleted the transaction history on her email, and cleared her browsing records. When Richard asked about the missing money again, she told him the bank was investigating it. She couldn't bear to hear the disappointment in his voice. Every lie she told made her feel both sick and free at the same time. She was hiding something that made her feel alive, even if it destroyed everything she'd built. David's tone shifted subtly after that argument. His messages became more urgent, more intimate. I hate the thought of you there, being doubted by someone who never truly loved you, he wrote. You're wasting away in that house. You belong with me, where you can finally breathe. He began calling her my wife in waiting. She told herself it was just words, but each one wrapped tighter around her mind. She stopped checking her reflection in the mirror before work. She stopped answering calls from Helen. Her days blurred into one long wait for David's next message. Then came the question that changed everything. It arrived on June 28, 2023, at 11:19 p.m. If you truly believe in us, he wrote, come to me. Leave everything behind. I can't build our life from across an ocean. She stared at the screen, her pulse quickening. He wasn't asking anymore. He was leading. For months, she had believed their connection was divine, destined. Now he wanted proof. She typed, you know I can't just leave like that. His reply came instantly. Then maybe what we have isn't real after all. The words hit her like a blow. For someone who had spent her life being unseen, being told she might lose the one person who saw her was unbearable. She called him that night, her voice shaking. Please don't say that, she whispered. He spoke softly, his tone calm and confident. Then come to me, Margaret. You deserve to live in love, not fear. I'll handle everything once you get here. Just trust me. For 2 weeks, she couldn't stop thinking about it. Every time she tried to focus on work, his words echoed. She looked up flights to the United States in secret, studying maps of Florida, imagining his face waiting at the gate. Her journal filled with plans written in nervous handwriting, lists of what to sell, what to pack, what to tell Richard. She even wrote her new name in one entry, Margaret Stone. On July 9th, she told David she was thinking about it. He responded with a voice message that she replayed over and over. You're brave, he said. Don't let anyone hold you hostage in a life that makes you feel small. Come home to me, my love. The rest will make sense later. That night, she recorded her own voice memo. Her tone was quiet, almost tender. I'm coming, my love, she whispered. She didn't know she had just spoken the words that would mark the beginning of her disappearance. If you've been following Margaret's story, take a moment to think about this. How far would you go for someone who made you feel seen after years of silence? July 14th, 2023. Perth, Western Australia. The morning sun filtered through lace curtains as Margaret Ellis sat at the dining table, her pen moving methodically across a sheet of paper. Numbers, dates, account references. Every line is precise, deliberate. For a woman who had built her entire life on order, what she was about to do required the same discipline she once reserved for balancing ledgers. Her phone buzzed beside her. A message from David Stone appeared on the screen. Once this is done, we'll never have to be apart again. You've waited your whole life for this moment. Be brave for us. She exhaled slowly and whispered, I'm ready. That morning marked the beginning of what she would later call the sale. For the next 6 days, Margaret moved like a woman with a plan. Her first step was to liquidate her assets, quietly, efficiently, without alerting anyone. She contacted her property agent, Liam Carter, who managed her 3 small rental units in Canning Vale. Her voice was calm on the call. "Liam, I've decided to sell all 3 properties. I'd like to move quickly, cash buyers only if possible." Surprised, he asked, "All 3? Are you sure, Margaret?" She smiled faintly, though he couldn't see it. "Yes, life's too short to wait." Within 72 hours, the listings went live. She priced them slightly below market value, enough to attract immediate offers. By July 19th, all 3 units were under contract. The deposits hit her account before Richard even knew they were on the market. Her next step was her car, a silver 2015 Toyota Camry she had owned for nearly a decade. She placed an online ad that morning and sold it the same afternoon to a young couple who didn't haggle over price. She told them she was downsizing. They thanked her. She smiled politely and handed over the keys. To anyone else, she seemed like a woman ready to retire somewhere peaceful. Only Margaret knew the truth. She wasn't retiring. She was escaping. By July 20th, the total in her private account had grown to more than $612,000 AUD, including funds she quietly pulled from her and Richard's joint retirement savings. She had told herself it was temporary, that she'd return it once she and David were settled in Florida. But that was the lie she used to silence her conscience. The real challenge came next, transferring it. David had sent her step-by-step instructions in a late-night message, each one written with unnerving precision. "Use multiple accounts," he told her. "Never send large amounts at once. Split the wires. Keep the records clean. It's just until I can access my new business account here in the States." Margaret followed every instruction like a student completing an assignment. Over the course of 3 days, she routed the money through 4 separate international accounts, first to Singapore, then through a brokerage in Toronto, and finally to a holding company registered in the Cayman Islands. Each transfer came with a fabricated explanation: investment consultancy, family property sale, retirement reinvestment. The paperwork was flawless, and when the last confirmation email arrived, she sat in silence, staring at the 6 digits that had defined her adult life. In one message to David later that evening, she wrote, "It's done. Everything is ready now." He responded, "You've just made our future possible, my love. I'll never forget what you've done for us." But one obstacle remained: Richard. He noticed her new detachment but mistook it for grief. When she told him she planned to visit her cousin Angela in Adelaide for a few weeks, he didn't question it. "You probably need a break," he said softly, sipping his coffee. "You've been tense lately." Margaret smiled faintly. "Just a change of air," she replied. He kissed her forehead before heading to work, never realizing that she wasn't going to Adelaide. She was leaving forever. That same afternoon, she visited a local bank branch with a folder of documents. The teller, Mia Roberts, later remembered her vividly: polite, calm, meticulously organized. She wasn't nervous at all, Mia recalled later. She knew exactly what she wanted and had every document ready. Among those papers was a power of attorney form bearing Richard's signature, a forgery Margaret had copied weeks earlier. It authorized the liquidation of remaining joint assets. She placed it on the counter with quiet confidence, and the teller processed it, without suspicion. Within hours, Margaret had full control over the last of their shared funds. That night, she opened her journal for the first time in months. Her handwriting, normally neat and measured, looked slightly uneven under the lamplight. She wrote, "Maybe happiness demands madness. Maybe faith requires leaving everything behind." Below it, she added one final line: "Tomorrow, I choose love." July 21st, 2023, Perth International Airport. The clock read 8:03 a.m. as Margaret walked through the terminal, carrying a single navy blue suitcase and her passport. She had told David she would send him her flight details before boarding. His reply came instantly: "I'll be waiting when you land. You'll see me before you even leave baggage claim. This is the beginning of us." She smiled at the screen, her hands trembling slightly as she turned off her phone before security. To everyone else that morning, she looked like just another traveler. Composed, confident, purposeful. She passed through the gate with her boarding pass in one hand and her wedding ring tucked deep in her purse. When the flight attendant greeted her with a smile, she smiled back, whispering, "Thank you," as though stepping into salvation. The aircraft door closed behind her, and for the first time in 32 years, Richard Ellis would eat dinner alone. As the plane ascended into the clouds, Margaret gazed out the window, the Australian coast fading beneath her. In her mind, she pictured David's voice, his promises, his verses of faith. "You're my answered prayer," he had written. "You were meant for me." She believed him. She believed every word. Before we continue, I want to hear from you. Have you ever known someone who trusted too deeply, who gave up everything for love? Where are you watching from right now? Drop it in the comments, and if you're still here with me, type "I'm still here." July 22nd, 2023, Orlando International Airport. The fluorescent lights glowed harshly against the polished floor as passengers poured out from the arrival gates. Among them was Margaret Ellis, clutching a small Navy suitcase and her phone. The long flight from Perth had left her drained, but hope kept her moving. This was the day she'd been waiting for, the day she would finally meet David Stone, the man whose voice had filled her empty nights, the man who had promised her a future of love and belonging. But as she waited near the baggage carousel, her phone buzzed with a message that made her stomach tighten. "Change of plans, my love. My associate Caleb will collect you. He's like a brother to me. I'll see you soon." She frowned, rereading the text. It wasn't what they had agreed. David had told her he would meet her at the airport, right at the arrivals exit, wearing a navy jacket and holding a white rose. Now, suddenly, there was someone else, someone she'd never heard of. Her hands trembled slightly as she typed, "Why can't you come?" The three dots blinked for a moment before another message appeared. "Just trust me, sweetheart. I'll explain everything when you get here." She hesitated but forced a smile, whispering to herself, "It's okay, Margaret. He loves you." Minutes later, she saw a man standing by the sliding doors. He was tall, medium build, wearing a gray hoodie and a baseball cap pulled low. In his hand, a small sign with her name, M. Ellis. He waved, polite but distant. She approached cautiously. "You must be Caleb," she said softly. He nodded. "Yes, ma'am. David couldn't make it. Something came up at work. But don't worry, I'll take you straight to him." His accent was American, smooth, practiced. She nodded, half relieved, half unsure. "He didn't tell me you'd be here." Caleb smiled faintly. "Last-minute change. You're in good hands." Security footage would later timestamp this moment at 6:31 p.m. The two of them walked side by side toward the parking garage. Margaret's suitcase rolled quietly behind her as she followed Caleb through the crowd. For a brief second, she looked over her shoulder, as if reconsidering everything, but then kept walking. Outside, the Florida air hit her like a warm wave, thick, humid, and unfamiliar. Caleb opened the passenger door of a silver Nissan SUV. "You must be tired," he said. "It's about a 2-hour drive to Jacksonville." She smiled faintly, adjusting her seatbelt. "I've waited 6 months for this. 2 hours is nothing." By 7:20 p.m., toll cameras caught the Nissan heading north on Interstate 95. Margaret texted David one more time. "I'm with Caleb. Can't wait to see you." The message was marked, delivered, but never read. The road stretched ahead, dark and endless, with headlights cutting through patches of rain. She looked out the window, watching the blur of trees and signs, trying to calm the unease by tightening her chest. At one point she said softly, "David said you've been friends for years." Caleb chuckled lightly. "Yeah, it's been a long time. He talks about you a lot." "He does?" she asked, smiling faintly. "All good things," he replied, eyes fixed on the road. At 8:37 p.m., her phone sent its final signal near a gas station off I-95, just outside St. Augustine. The last text she ever sent read, "Almost there, love." Then, silence. Her phone went offline moments later. Hours passed before anyone noticed she was gone. Richard Ellis, back home in Perth, woke up to the usual morning quiet. He sent her a short message. "Hope you're safe. Call me when you land." It never delivered. He tried again later, then again that night. Still nothing. He told himself the time zones were off, that maybe she was resting after the long flight. But deep down, he felt something wasn't right. 2 days later, at a small gas station off the interstate, an employee found a navy blue suitcase dumped behind the dumpsters. Inside was a travel pillow, a passport cover, and a few scattered receipts from the Orlando terminal. The tag read, M. Ellis. There was no sign of her phone, her wallet, or her jewelry. When the attendant turned the suitcase over, a faded boarding pass slipped out, her name clearly printed across it. That would be the last trace of Margaret Ellis. No one saw her again after she left that airport with Caleb Ward. Her bank accounts froze. Her phone remained dark. Her emails stopped. It was as if she had vanished between Orlando and Jacksonville, lost somewhere in the stretch of highway that had promised love but delivered nothing but silence. August 2023, Jacksonville, Florida. The search for Margaret Ellis had turned into a national investigation, but as the hours turned into days, one name began surfacing again and again: Caleb Ward. He was the man last seen with her, the one who signed her motel check-in slip, the one who vanished 2 days after she disappeared. The FBI began digging into his past, piecing together a history that read like a manual on deception. Caleb wasn't a stranger to crime. He was a man who had been practicing lies since boyhood. Born in 1985 in Daytona Beach, Caleb grew up in a world where rules were optional and survival was everything. His mother, Sharon Ward, worked 2 jobs, a night shift at a diner and weekends at a laundromat. His father was never in the picture. From a young age, Caleb learned that charm could get him what money couldn't. Teachers described him as bright but manipulative, a boy who could talk his way out of anything. By 16, he was forging report cards to keep himself in school, and by 19, he had created fake checks that fooled a local pawn shop into giving him $3,000. When police confronted him, he laughed and said, "You can't arrest someone for being smarter than the system." He served 6 months in juvenile detention. It wouldn't be his last time behind bars. At 22, Caleb's crimes escalated. He was caught using stolen credit cards from elderly nursing home residents, buying electronics, reselling them online, and transferring the profits into offshore wallets. During interrogation, detectives noted his calm demeanor. One officer recalled asking him, "Do you ever think about the people you hurt?" Caleb smiled faintly and said, "I don't steal from people. I steal from systems. People are just part of the process." That line would follow him through every criminal file that bore his name. Released in 2009, he promised to change. But change wasn't profitable. Within a few years, he reinvented himself, not as a thief, but as a recruiter for an expanding web of international cyber fraud rings targeting lonely older women online. By 2015, he had become what agents later called a collector. His role wasn't to build relationships or write love letters. His job was to act as the physical link, the person who moved money, picked up victims, and erased traces when operations needed to disappear. Behind every David Stone or Mark Anthony or Paul Rivers online, there was Caleb somewhere waiting to clean up the mess. In this particular case, the alias David Stone wasn't a single man. It was an entire synthetic identity, built and operated by multiple scammers across Ghana, Romania, and the Bahamas. They used pre-written scripts, timed messages, and artificial emotional mapping tools that predicted how victims would respond. The messages Margaret received, "You're my answered prayer," or "God brings 2 broken souls together for a reason," weren't original. They were lines tested, refined, and used on dozens of other women around the world. FBI agents uncovered this during a digital sweep after tracing the Cayman Islands accounts linked to Margaret's missing funds. The fraud's sophistication shocked investigators. The messages were routed through virtual private servers, each bouncing across continents before landing in Florida. The phone number registered to David Stone was actually owned by an untraceable VoIP company headquartered in Romania. But it was Caleb Ward's fingerprints, not code, that connected the dots between fiction and reality. On August 4, 2023, agents obtained a warrant to search a budget motel off Phillips Highway, the same place where Margaret had reportedly checked in. Room 108 was a mess. Drawers half open, the bathroom mirror cracked, and the faint smell of bleach in the air. Under the bed, they found a torn notebook page, written in Margaret's familiar handwriting. "If something happens to me, his name isn't David. His real name is..." The line stopped mid-sentence. The ink trailed off the page. The note was never finished. Next to it lay an unused SIM card, a half-empty water bottle, and a charger without a phone. Caleb was gone. When agents tracked his known associates, they discovered he had withdrawn $9,200 in cash from an ATM in Jacksonville, hours after Margaret's last phone ping. A nearby gas station camera captured him wearing the same hoodie from the airport. He was driving the same Nissan SUV. But after that footage, nothing. The car was later found abandoned near the Georgia border, wiped clean of prints except one partial match on the steering wheel, Caleb's. What made the discovery more chilling was what came next. Digital forensics from his motel room laptop revealed saved drafts of messages addressed to women from 4 different countries, all written under the same alias, David Stone. Each message began the same way. "You seem kind. I lost my wife 3 years ago. Maybe God lets broken people find each other." They were identical to the ones sent to Margaret. Her story wasn't unique. It was part of a system designed to turn hope into income. One agent summarized it best in his report. "This was never about love. It was about leverage, emotional, financial, and digital. Every word they sent was part of a playbook." But what haunted investigators most was the note Margaret left behind. Incomplete, desperate, and uncertain. It suggested that somewhere in those final hours, she had begun to realize the truth. She knew David wasn't real, but she didn't yet know who he really was. Thank you for staying with this story. Your support helps us bring hidden truths like this to light. Join our community today, not just to watch, but to help protect others from stories that end like Margaret's. Tap subscribe, stay aware, and never stop asking, who's really behind the screen? September 30th, 2023, Perth, Australia. The early morning light crept across the kitchen counter as Richard Ellis poured his first cup of coffee, the same way he had for years. The house was still, the same silence that had haunted him since his wife vanished 2 months earlier. The investigation had grown cold. Her name had faded from headlines. The phone calls from detectives had slowed. But that morning, when his laptop pinged with a new message, everything stopped. The subject line read simply, "From Margaret." His breath caught as he clicked it open. The message was short, typed from her old Gmail account. "He's not who you think. Don't trust them. If I disappear completely, know I tried." There was no greeting, no explanation, just those words and a timestamp, 1:04 a.m. His hands trembled as he read it again and again. He called her name out loud, as if she might answer from another room. "Margaret?" His voice cracked in the empty kitchen. For a brief second, he allowed himself to believe she was alive, that maybe she had escaped, that maybe this message meant hope. But when detectives traced the email header hours later, the truth deepened the mystery. The signal had originated 3,000 miles away, from an internet cafe in Belize City, Central America, a known hotspot for offshore cybercrime operators. The account had been accessed through an encrypted VPN chain that bounced between 4 countries. Whoever sent it had hidden their location perfectly. But one small detail stood out. The signature at the bottom read, "Sent from my Samsung Galaxy," the same model phone Margaret had owned. Interpol was immediately notified. and within days, agents launched a joint raid in Belize City, targeting a network of suspected digital fraudsters. Inside an unmarked building above a used electronics shop, they found servers stacked like monoliths, each holding fragments of stolen data, fake passports, and message scripts identical to those used in the David Stone operation. Dozens of burner emails connected to the same network had been traced to West Africa, Romania, and Florida, but there was no trace of Margaret Ellis. Her name appeared once, linked to a forged property deed filed under her identity in the Cayman Islands, dated just 1 week earlier. The deed claimed ownership of a vacant villa worth over $1.2 million USD, but when investigators tried to verify it, the record had already been deleted. It was as though someone had used her name for a moment, and then erased it again. Back in Perth, Richard sat across from Detective Sergeant Laura Bennett, who handled cyber cases for the Western Australian Police. "Is it possible she's alive?" he asked. The detective sighed, her tone steady but heavy. The message came from her account. But whether she sent it, or someone wanted you to think she did, we don't know. He leaned forward, desperate. She said, "Don't trust them." Who was she talking about? Laura looked at him for a long moment before replying, "That's the question, Mr. Ellis. We're trying to figure that out." By mid-October, the case had drawn the attention of Interpol's Cybercrime Directorate. Their reports suggested that the David Stone identity was part of a larger structure, an organized transnational syndicate that had defrauded more than 50 victims across multiple continents. Margaret wasn't the first. But what made her case stand out was that final message. Agents said it didn't match the usual tone of scripted scam communications. One investigator described it as a cry from someone who realized too late she wasn't just being conned, she was being erased. The FBI's forensic linguist, Dr. Robert Glassman, analyzed the syntax of the email and noted something chilling. "The phrasing suggests distress," he explained in an interview. "The use of short declarative sentences, 'He's not who you think, don't trust them,' implies fear, urgency, and finality. Whoever wrote it believed time was running out." Still, no one could prove whether those words were typed by Margaret herself or forged by the same people who had taken her. Meanwhile, digital footprints in Belize revealed faint connections to Caleb Ward's network. Surveillance from the raid captured 2 men leaving a cafe minutes before the signal was traced. One resembling Caleb's description, though the footage was too grainy for a positive ID. The SUV used in Margaret's pickup had also been spotted entering southern Mexico weeks after she vanished, but the trail went cold again near the Belize border. Investigators believe Margaret may have been held alive for days after her disappearance, possibly forced to send or record messages under direction. But without her body, without proof, every theory collapses into another unanswered question. Was the email her final attempt to warn her husband? Or was it a ghost-written illusion, a way for the criminals to tie up loose ends while keeping the myth alive? So I'll ask you, what do you think? Was she silenced to protect something bigger, or did she become part of the very network that consumed her? Type your thoughts below. I want to hear what you believe really happened to Margaret. Because in cases like this, sometimes the story doesn't end with an answer. It ends with a question. Perth, Western Australia, February 2024. The sun rises quietly over the Indian Ocean, painting the shoreline in shades of gold and blue. Richard Ellis, now gray around the temples and thinner than he once was, stands alone at the edge of the surf. In his hand is a worn photograph, Margaret in her younger years, smiling, her eyes soft and certain, taken long before the internet turned love into a transaction. The wind catches the corners of the photo as he whispers, "You just wanted to be seen, didn't you?" It's been 7 months since she vanished. 7 months since he last heard her voice, and still, no one can tell him for sure whether she's alive or gone. The investigation has slowed to a crawl, but the scars left behind, emotional, financial, and human, remain as raw as ever. Margaret Ellis did not die chasing love. She died chasing acknowledgement, the simple desire to be noticed, to be understood, to to matter in a world that now confuses messages for meaning. For her, connection became currency, faith became evidence, and loneliness became a doorway for those who knew exactly how to walk through it. She wasn't foolish. She was human. A woman who mistook attention for affection in a digital age designed to exploit both. As Richard drops the photo into the waves, he looks toward the horizon where the sea meets the sky. The same way Margaret once looked at her computer screen, believing there was someone on the other side who truly saw her. The waves pull the picture under and return nothing. The narrator's tone lowers again, leaving the audience with a lingering stillness. The story of Margaret Ellis is not about love lost. It's about the cost of being unseen, and the predators who wait in that silence. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that uncover the truth behind human deception, and the fragile hope that still fights to survive it.